The silver sedan pulled into the circular driveway of the Grand Vista Hotel, just as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. David turned off the engine and looked up at the impressive building before them. The hotel stood 4 stories tall with cream-colored stone walls and large windows that sparkled in the sunlight. Ivy climbed gracefully up one side of the building, giving it an old-world charm that spoke of elegance and refinement. "This place looks even better than the photos online," he said to his wife, reaching over to squeeze her hand gently. Rebecca smiled, her eyes bright with excitement. "I can't believe we're finally here. After all those months of planning, we made it." She gathered her purse and checked her appearance in the side mirror one more time. Her navy blue dress was wrinkle-free despite the 6-hour drive, and her hair was still perfectly styled from their morning departure. They had been looking forward to this weekend for what felt like forever. It was their 15th wedding anniversary, and David's college reunion was happening at the same time. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. They rarely took time away from their demanding careers, so this 3-day getaway felt like a precious gift they were giving themselves. David stepped out of the car and stretched, working out the kinks from the long drive. At 42, he maintained the same athletic build he'd had in college, though his hair now showed touches of gray at the temples. He walked around to open Rebecca's door, a gesture he'd never stopped making even after all these years of marriage. "Such a gentleman," she laughed, accepting his offered hand as she stepped out onto the smooth pavement. At 39, Rebecca moved with the confident grace of someone who was used to being in charge. Yet she still felt butterflies in her stomach about this weekend. They both worked incredibly hard, and moments like this reminded her why their relationship had lasted so long. The valet, a young man in a crisp uniform, approached them with a warm smile. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Grand Vista Hotel. Will you be checking in today?" "Yes, we have a reservation," David replied, handing over the car keys. "The name is Thompson." "Wonderful. The front desk will take excellent care of you. Enjoy your stay." They gathered their weekend bags from the trunk. Rebecca had packed carefully, bringing her favorite dress for the reunion dinner and comfortable clothes for exploring the charming downtown area they'd read so much about. David carried both their bags, insisting, despite Rebecca's protests, that she could handle her own luggage. As they walked through the heavy glass doors, the hotel lobby opened up before them like something from a magazine. The floors were polished marble that reflected the light from an enormous crystal chandelier hanging overhead. Comfortable seating areas with plush velvet chairs were arranged around small tables, where other guests sat chatting quietly or reading newspapers. Fresh flowers in tall vases filled the air with a subtle, pleasant fragrance. "This is incredible," Rebecca whispered, not wanting to disturb the peaceful atmosphere. She noticed how other guests were dressed elegantly but casually, exactly the way she and David had chosen to present themselves for check-in. The front desk stretched across one wall, made of dark wood that gleamed under carefully placed lighting. Behind it, a wall of small cubbyholes held room keys and messages, giving the place a classic, timeless feel. 2 staff members worked behind the counter, both wearing the hotel's signature burgundy vests. David and Rebecca approached the desk, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The woman helping another guest looked up briefly and smiled politely before returning to her work. The second staff member, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a nameplate reading "Manager," glanced in their direction. His expression changed almost immediately. The welcoming smile that had been on his face just moments before seemed to freeze, then slowly fade away. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked them up and down, taking in every detail of their appearance. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone noticeably cooler than the warm greeting the valet had given them outside. David stepped forward confidently. "Yes, we'd like to check in. We have a reservation under Thompson. We booked the anniversary suite for 3 nights." The manager, whose nameplate identified him as Gerald Whitmore, turned to his computer screen without the usual pleasantries most hotel guests received. His fingers moved slowly across the keyboard and he frowned at whatever appeared on his monitor. "Thompson, you said?" His voice carried a note of skepticism that made Rebecca glance at David with concern. "That's right. We made the reservation 3 months ago and received confirmation emails. I can show you if you need to see them." David reached for his phone, but Whitmore held up a hand to stop him. "I'm seeing some problems with your reservation," Whitmore said, still staring at his screen. "Our system shows some irregularities. Rebecca stepped closer to the counter. What kind of irregularities? We prepaid for the room and received confirmation just last week that everything was set for our arrival today. Other guests in the lobby began to notice the conversation at the front desk. An elderly couple sitting nearby looked up from their afternoon tea, and a businessman working on his laptop paused to glance in their direction. The atmosphere, which had felt so welcoming just minutes before, now seemed tense and uncomfortable. Whitmore continued typing, making a show of searching through his computer system. I'm not seeing any available rooms for tonight. In fact, it looks like we're completely booked for the entire weekend. David pulled out his phone and opened his email. That's impossible. Here's our confirmation number. He showed the screen to Whitmore, who barely glanced at it. Confirmation numbers can sometimes be generated in error. Whitmore replied dismissively. Our system has been having technical difficulties lately. The lie was so obvious that Rebecca felt her cheeks flush with frustration. She had worked in high-pressure situations her entire career and knew how to stay calm under stress, but this was different. Something felt very wrong about this entire interaction. Could you check with your manager? She asked politely, though she was beginning to suspect that Whitmore himself might be in charge. I am the manager, he replied curtly, and I'm telling you that we don't have any rooms available. The young woman working at the other end of the front desk kept glancing over nervously. She had clearly heard the entire conversation and seemed uncomfortable with how it was unfolding. When she caught Rebecca's eye, she quickly looked away. David took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice level and professional. Sir, I understand that hotels sometimes have booking issues, but we've traveled 6 hours to get here. Surely there's something you can do to accommodate us. We're not asking for anything special, just the room we reserved and paid for months ago. Whitmore's response would change everything about their anniversary weekend, and neither David nor Rebecca had any idea just how much their lives were about to be turned upside down by what happened next. Whitmore's face hardened as he looked at David and Rebecca. The friendly hotel manager persona had completely disappeared, replaced by something cold and unwelcoming. He closed his computer screen with more force than necessary and leaned back in his chair. Let me be very clear, he said, his voice carrying across the quiet lobby. We don't have any rooms available, and I'm not sure this establishment would be the right fit for you anyway. Rebecca felt her stomach drop. The meaning behind his words was becoming painfully obvious, but she couldn't quite believe what was happening. She had experienced subtle discrimination before in her professional life, but nothing this blatant and public. What exactly do you mean by that? David asked, his voice still controlled but with an edge that hadn't been there before. He was a man who chose his words carefully, especially in tense situations. Whitmore glanced around the lobby, noting that several guests were now openly watching the confrontation. This seemed to make him more defensive rather than encouraging him to handle the situation more professionally. I mean that perhaps he would be more comfortable at one of the chain hotels down by the highway, he said, emphasizing certain words in a way that left no doubt about his intentions. They're more accommodating to all types of guests. The elderly couple who had been having tea stood up abruptly and walked toward the elevator, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. The businessman with the laptop was no longer pretending to work, and was instead recording the interaction with his phone held discreetly at table level. Rebecca's professional training kicked in. As someone who dealt with life and death situations regularly, she knew how to stay calm under pressure. But this was different. This was personal, and it was wrong on every level she could imagine. Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said, keeping her voice steady and clear. We have a confirmed reservation. We've paid for our room, and we've traveled a long distance to stay at your hotel. I'm not sure what you mean about being more comfortable elsewhere. Whitmore stood up from his chair behind the counter, making himself appear taller and more intimidating. Ma'am, I think you understand exactly what I mean. This is a high-end establishment with certain standards and expectations. David reached into his wallet and pulled out his credit card, placing it firmly on the marble counter. Here's my American Express Black card, run it. You'll find that our credit is excellent and our money is just as good as anyone else's. The sight of the exclusive credit card seemed to irritate Whitmore even more. It clearly wasn't the response he had expected, and it undermined whatever assumptions he had made about the couple's financial status. I don't care what kind of credit card you have, he snapped. I'm telling you that we're fully booked. And even if we weren't, I have the right to refuse service to anyone I choose. The young woman at the other end of the front desk looked like she wanted to disappear. She had been working at the hotel for 2 years and had never seen anything like this. She knew the hotel wasn't fully booked, because she had checked people into rooms just an hour earlier, and there were definitely vacant suites available. Rebecca pulled out her own phone and opened her email application. Here's our reservation confirmation, sent from your hotel's booking system 3 days ago. She turned the screen toward Whitmore. It shows our room number, our check-in time, and the total amount we've already paid. Whitmore barely glanced at the phone. Email confirmations can be faked. People do it all the time trying to get free rooms. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. David felt his hands clench into fists at his sides, but his training and professional experience helped him maintain control. He had dealt with difficult people before, but rarely had he encountered such blatant hostility in what should have been a simple business transaction. Are you suggesting that we're trying to defraud your hotel? David asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm suggesting that you find somewhere else to stay, Whitmore replied. He reached under the counter and pressed a button. Within moments, a security guard appeared from a side office. The guard, a large man in his 50s wearing a uniform that was slightly too tight, looked confused as he approached the front desk. You called for security, Mr. Whitmore? Yes, please escort these people out of the hotel. They're causing a disturbance and refusing to leave when I've told them we have no rooms available. The security guard looked from Whitmore to David and Rebecca, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. They were well-dressed, polite, and certainly didn't appear to be causing any kind of disturbance. In fact, the only person raising his voice was Whitmore himself. Folks, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, the guard said reluctantly. Hotel policy. Rebecca felt tears of frustration and humiliation beginning to form in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people who were watching their dignified weekend getaway turn into a nightmare. This is discrimination, she said clearly, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. You're refusing us service based on the color of our skin, and that's illegal. You can't prove anything, Whitmore shot back. I told you we're fully booked. That's not discrimination, that's business. David pulled out his phone and began recording. Then you won't mind if I document this conversation for our attorney. The sight of the phone camera seemed to enrage Whitmore further. No recording allowed in this hotel. That's private property violation. Actually, this is a public accommodation, David replied calmly, and I have every right to document discrimination when it's happening to me. The businessman who had been discreetly recording stood up and approached the front desk. Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. I'm a guest here, and I can confirm that this hotel is definitely not fully booked. I saw at least 3 people check in during the last hour. Whitmore turned his anger toward the businessman. Sir, I need you to mind your own business and return to your seat. My business is standing up for what's right, the man replied firmly, and what I'm witnessing right now is completely wrong. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Whitmore seemed to realize that he was losing any pretense of legitimacy for his actions. The security guard looked increasingly uncomfortable, as more guests in the lobby began to take notice and several people were now holding up phones. I want them out of here now, Whitmore commanded the security guard. Remove them from the property immediately. The guard hesitated for a moment longer, then stepped forward. I'm sorry, but I really do need to ask you to leave. You can file a complaint with management later if you feel you've been treated unfairly. David and Rebecca looked at each other, communicating volumes in a single glance. They both knew that staying and fighting would only make the situation worse and more humiliating. With as much dignity as they could maintain, they picked up their bags and walked toward the exit. As they reached the lobby doors, Rebecca turned back one final time. We'll be filing a complaint with the State Attorney General's office and the Better Business Bureau. This isn't over, Whitmore called after them loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. Don't bother coming back. We don't want your kind here anyway. The words echoed through the marble lobby as the heavy glass doors closed behind them, leaving David and Rebecca standing on the sidewalk beside their car, their anniversary weekend in ruins before it had even begun. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching the mood at the Grand Vista Hotel. Several staff members had barely slept, troubled by what they had witnessed the day before. Among them was Jennifer, the young woman who had been working at the front desk during the incident. She had tossed and turned all night, replaying the scene over and over in her mind. Jennifer had worked at the hotel for 2 years and had never seen anything like what happened yesterday. She knew that David and Rebecca Thompson had a valid reservation because she had helped process their booking months earlier. She also knew that the hotel had plenty of available rooms, including the anniversary suite they had specifically requested. During her morning break, Jennifer sat in the employee lounge with her coffee, staring at her phone. She had been thinking about calling someone, but she wasn't sure who or what she should say. Her supervisor was Gerald Whitmore himself, and she was afraid of losing her job if she spoke up against him. Finally, she made her decision. She pulled up the website for the local civil rights organization and found their phone number. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed. Civil Rights Alliance, this is Patricia speaking. How can I help you?
Hi, I witnessed something yesterday at my workplace that I think you should know about,
Jennifer began nervously. I work at the Grand Vista Hotel, and I saw the manager refuse service to a black couple who had a valid reservation. It was clearly discrimination, and I have it on the security cameras. Patricia sat up straighter at her desk. She had handled hundreds of discrimination complaints over the years, but most came from the victims themselves, not witnesses. Can you tell me more about what happened? Jennifer spent the next 20 minutes describing everything she had seen and heard. Patricia took careful notes, asking specific questions about timing, witnesses, and whether any recordings existed. The security footage would be crucial evidence, Patricia explained. Do you think you could access it? I can try, Jennifer said. I have access to the system as part of my job, but I'm scared about what will happen if they find out I'm involved. I understand your concerns, but what you witnessed was illegal. These people deserve justice, and you might be the only person who can help them get it. Meanwhile, across town at the newspaper office, investigative reporter Michael Chen was having a slow news day. He was scrolling through social media when a video caught his attention. The caption read, "Racist hotel manager kicks out black couple, disgusting." The video was shaky and had poor audio, but Michael could see enough to understand what was happening. A well-dressed black couple was being escorted out of an upscale hotel, while a white manager shouted after them. The video already had thousands of views and hundreds of angry comments. Michael immediately recognized the hotel as the Grand Vista, one of the most prestigious establishments in the city. He grabbed his press credentials and headed for the door. If this story was legitimate, it was exactly the kind of investigative piece his newspaper needed. At the hotel, Michael found Whitmore in his office, looking stressed and defensive. Word had already gotten back to him about the viral video, and he was preparing damage control statements. Mr. Whitmore, I'm Michael Chen from the City Tribune. I'd like to ask you some questions about an incident that occurred here yesterday involving a black couple who were refused service. Whitmore's face turned red. That's a complete mischaracterization of what happened. We were fully booked, and they became belligerent when I explained the situation. I had every right to ask them to leave. But according to witnesses, you made several statements that suggested racial bias. One person reported that you told them to find somewhere more suitable, and said you didn't want their kind at your hotel. Those are lies. Whitmore slammed his hand on his desk. I run a respectable business, and I don't discriminate against anyone. This is just people trying to cause trouble and get something for nothing. Michael took careful notes of Whitmore's responses, particularly noting his defensive tone and unwillingness to take any responsibility for the incident. As a seasoned reporter, he could tell when someone was hiding something. Can you tell me the names of the couple who were refused service? I'd like to get their side of the story. I don't have to tell you anything, Whitmore snapped him. This interview is over, but Michael wasn't giving up that easily. He spent the rest of the day tracking down witnesses from the hotel lobby. The businessman who had stood up to defend the couple was happy to talk and provided Michael with his own video footage of the incident. It was the most blatant case of discrimination I've ever witnessed, the businessman told him. That manager was clearly targeting them because of their race. The couple was nothing but polite and professional, even when they were being humiliated. Michael also spoke with several hotel employees who agreed to talk anonymously. They painted a picture of Whitmore as someone who had made questionable comments about guests before, though never as publicly as he had yesterday. The breakthrough came when Jennifer contacted Michael through the newspaper's anonymous tip line. She agreed to meet him in a coffee shop far from the hotel. "I have the security footage," she told him quietly, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Everything is on there. You can see the whole thing from multiple angles." Michael reviewed the footage that evening, and what he saw made his jaw drop. The video clearly showed Whitmore's discriminatory behavior, but it also revealed something else that made the story even more explosive. As he enhanced the audio and cleaned up the video quality, Michael was able to identify David and Rebecca Thompson more clearly. Something about the man seemed familiar, so he ran a reverse image search using screenshots from the security footage. The results made Michael's heart race. David Thompson wasn't just any victim of discrimination. He was Judge David Thompson, one of the most respected federal judges in the state. Michael had actually covered several of his high-profile cases over the years. Further research revealed that Rebecca Thompson was Dr. Rebecca Thompson, the chief of pediatric surgery at Children's Memorial Hospital. Michael found dozens of articles about her groundbreaking medical work and her humanitarian efforts in underserved communities. This wasn't just a story about hotel discrimination anymore. This was a story about a racist hotel manager who had humiliated two of the most accomplished and respected professionals in the entire city. Michael worked through the night, crafting his article carefully. He reached out to colleagues at both the courthouse and the hospital, who confirmed the couple's identities and provided background on their impressive careers and reputations. By morning, Michael had a story that would not only expose the discrimination at the Grand Vista Hotel, but also reveal the bitter irony of who had been targeted. A federal judge who had presided over civil rights cases and a doctor who had dedicated her life to helping children had been treated like criminals simply because of the color of their skin. The story was set to run in the morning edition, but Michael knew that once it hit the internet, the Grand Vista Hotel would never be the same. Neither would Gerald Whitmore. As he prepared to submit his article to his editor, Michael's phone buzzed with a text message from his source at the Civil Rights Organization. "Just got word that the Attorney General's office is opening an investigation. This is about to get very serious." Michael smiled grimly as he typed his final paragraph. Justice, he thought, was finally coming to the Grand Vista Hotel. When Michael Chen's article hit the internet at 6 in the morning, it took less than 30 minutes for the story to explode across social media. The headline read, "Federal Judge and Renowned Surgeon Kicked Out of Hotel for Being Black." Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times and picked up by national news outlets. At the federal courthouse, Judge David Thompson's colleagues were arriving for work when they first heard about the story. Court clerks, attorneys, and fellow judges gathered around computers and phones, reading the article with growing disbelief and anger. "I can't believe someone would treat David and Rebecca this way," said Judge Patricia Williams, David's closest colleague on the bench. "David has handled some of the most important civil rights cases in this district. The irony is just incredible." Similar conversations were happening at Children's Memorial Hospital, where Dr. Rebecca Thompson's colleagues were equally outraged. Nurses, doctors, and administrators who had worked with Rebecca for years were sharing the story and expressing their shock. "Rebecca has saved hundreds of children's lives," said Dr. Angela Foster, who worked closely with Rebecca in the pediatric department. "She's one of the most compassionate and professional people I know. To treat her this way is just unthinkable." Meanwhile, at the Grand Vista Hotel, Gerald Whitmore was experiencing the worst morning of his professional life. His phone had been ringing non-stop since sunrise, with reporters requesting interviews and angry callers expressing their outrage. The hotel's main phone line was also jammed with people canceling reservations and demanding refunds. Whitmore had called an emergency meeting with his staff, but the mood in the conference room was tense and hostile. Several employees had already submitted their resignations, and others were openly questioning his leadership. "Mr. Whitmore, I think you need to apologize publicly and try to make this right," suggested Jennifer, who had found the courage to speak up after providing the security footage to the newspaper. "This story is everywhere and people are furious." "I'm not apologizing for anything," Whitmore replied angrily. "I did nothing wrong. I have the right to run my business the way I see fit." His defiance only made the situation worse. By noon, 3 major corporate clients had canceled their contracts with the hotel. representing hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost revenue. The hotel's online reviews were flooded with one-star ratings and angry comments from people who had never even stayed there but were responding to the story. The situation reached a new level of crisis when Whitmore decided to appear on the local television news for a live interview. Against the advice of everyone around him, he thought he could defend his actions and control the narrative. The interview was a disaster from the first question. "Mr. Whitmore, you've been accused of discriminating against Judge David Thompson and Dr. Rebecca Thompson. What's your response to these allegations?" "First of all, I had no idea who these people were," Whitmore replied, already making a crucial mistake. "If I had known they were important people, obviously I would have handled things differently." The interviewer's eyebrows shot up. "Are you saying that discrimination is acceptable as long as the victims aren't famous or powerful?" Whitmore realized his error but tried to backtrack. "That's not what I meant. What I'm saying is that this whole thing has been blown out of proportion. We were fully booked, and they became difficult when I explained the situation. But we have security footage that shows your hotel was not fully booked, and witnesses who say you made explicitly racial comments. How do you explain that?" Whitmore's face turned red as he struggled to maintain his composure. "People hear what they want to hear. I run a high-class establishment, and sometimes people who aren't used to that kind of environment feel uncomfortable." The interview went downhill from there. Every answer Whitmore gave seemed to make his position worse, and by the time it was over, even his most loyal supporters were abandoning him. At the state capitol, Attorney General Lisa Rodriguez was watching the interview with her civil rights enforcement team. She had already ordered an investigation into the Grand Vista Hotel, but Whitmore's television appearance convinced her that this case needed to be a priority. "This is exactly the kind of blatant discrimination that we cannot tolerate," she told her staff. "I want a full investigation of their business practices, their employment records, and any other complaints that have been filed against them." The federal courthouse was also taking action. While David Thompson recused himself from any potential legal proceedings involving the hotel, his colleagues were making it clear that the federal judicial system would not tolerate attacks on one of their own. Chief Judge Robert Martinez issued a rare public statement. "Judge Thompson has served this district with distinction and honor for over a decade. The treatment he and his wife received is not only morally reprehensible, but strikes at the heart of the civil rights principles our courts are sworn to protect." By evening, the story had reached national news networks. Cable news shows were featuring panels discussing the case, and legal experts were explaining the various laws that had likely been violated. Dr. Rebecca Thompson's medical colleagues organized a solidarity rally at the hospital. Hundreds of doctors, nurses, and staff members gathered to show their support and to call for justice. The images of medical professionals in their scrubs, holding signs demanding equality, made powerful television footage that further amplified the story. The hotel's investor group held an emergency conference call that lasted late into the night. The Grand Vista Hotel was part of a larger portfolio of properties, and the other businesses were beginning to suffer from their association with the scandal. "We need to cut ties with Whitmore immediately," argued the lead investor. "Every day we keep him as manager costs us more money and damages our reputation." But Whitmore wasn't going down without a fight. He hired a crisis management firm and a high-powered attorney, determined to save his career and his business. His lawyer issued a statement claiming that the discrimination allegations were false and that they would vigorously defend against any legal action. The statement only made things worse. Civil rights organizations announced they would be organizing boycotts of not just the Grand Vista Hotel, but any business associated with Whitmore or his investors. Community leaders called for the hotel to be stripped of its business licenses and permits. Local businesses began distancing themselves from the hotel. Restaurants canceled catering contracts. Tour companies removed the Grand Vista from their recommended accommodations, and even the taxi companies instructed their drivers to suggest alternative hotels to customers. As the sun set on what had started as a normal business day, Gerald Whitmore sat alone in his office, surrounded by stacks of canceled reservation confirmations and resignation letters from his staff. The Grand Vista Hotel, which had taken decades to build its reputation, was crumbling around him in a matter of hours. Outside, protesters had gathered on the sidewalk with signs demanding justice for Judge Thompson and Dr. Thompson. Local news crews were broadcasting live from the scene, and the story showed no signs of slowing down. Whitmore looked out his window at the crowd below and realized that his decision to discriminate against two guests had not only ruined their anniversary weekend, but had also destroyed everything he had worked to build. The consequences of his actions were spreading far beyond anything he could have imagined, and there was no going back now. 6 months later, the Grand Vista Hotel looked almost exactly the same from the outside, but everything else had changed completely. The elegant building still stood proudly on its manicured grounds, but new management had transformed it into something entirely different from what it had been under Gerald Whitmore's control. Whitmore himself was long gone, forced to sell the hotel after facing a cascade of legal challenges, financial losses, and public condemnation that made it impossible for him to continue operating. The investor group had given him an ultimatum: sell or face a lawsuit that would strip him of everything. He chose to sell, though the price was far below what the property had been worth before the scandal. The new owners, a partnership between a successful black businessman named Robert Johnson and a civil rights organization, had purchased the hotel with a clear mission. They wanted to turn it into a symbol of inclusion and equality, proving that businesses could thrive when they welcomed everyone with dignity and respect. On a warm Saturday morning, exactly 6 months after the discrimination incident, Judge David Thompson and Dr. Rebecca Thompson returned to the Grand Vista Hotel for the first time since that terrible day. They had been invited as guests of honor for a special event that would officially mark the hotel's transformation. As their car pulled into the familiar circular driveway, both David and Rebecca felt a mix of emotions. The memories of their humiliation were still fresh, but they had also seen how their painful experience had led to meaningful change. "I never thought we'd be coming back here," Rebecca said softly, looking up at the building that had caused them so much pain. "Neither did I," David replied, taking her hand. "But look at what's happened. Sometimes something good can come from something terrible." The new manager, a young black woman named Angela Washington, greeted them personally at the entrance. She had been hired specifically because of her experience in hospitality and her commitment to creating an inclusive environment for all guests. "Judge and Dr. Thompson, welcome to the Grand Vista Hotel," she said warmly. "We are so honored to have you here today." As they walked through the lobby, David and Rebecca noticed immediately how different the atmosphere felt. The staff was notably diverse, representing many different backgrounds and ethnicities. More importantly, there was a sense of genuine warmth and welcome that had been completely absent during their previous visit. The event that day was the grand opening of the Thompson Civil Rights Learning Center, a permanent exhibition space within the hotel that would educate visitors about the history of discrimination and the ongoing fight for equality. The center was named in honor of David and Rebecca, though they had initially been reluctant to accept such recognition. "We didn't want this to be about us personally," Rebecca explained to the gathered crowd of community leaders, activists, and journalists. "We wanted it to be about the principle that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are or what they look like." The Learning Center featured interactive exhibits about the civil rights movement, local history, and contemporary issues around equality and inclusion, but the centerpiece was a display about the hotel incident itself, complete with the security footage that had helped expose the discrimination. "We're not trying to shame anyone or dwell on the past," explained Robert Johnson, the new owner. "We're trying to learn from what happened and make sure it never happens again. This hotel is going to be a place where everyone feels welcome." The transformation went far beyond symbolic gestures. The new management had implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all staff members, created partnerships with local civil rights organizations, and established a scholarship fund to help young people from underserved communities pursue careers in hospitality. Jennifer, the former front desk clerk who had risked her job to provide the security footage, was now the hotel's director of guest relations. Her courage in speaking out had earned her recognition and a promotion that reflected her true capabilities. "What happened here taught me that staying silent in the face of injustice makes you part of the problem," she told the audience. "I'm proud to work for a hotel that stands for something positive now." The financial transformation had been just as dramatic as the cultural one. Despite losing some customers who disagreed with the hotel's new direction, The Grand Vista was actually more profitable than it had ever been. The positive publicity had attracted guests from around the country who specifically wanted to support a business that stood for equality and inclusion. The hotel had also become a popular venue for conferences and events related to civil rights, social justice, and community organizing. Corporate clients who valued diversity and inclusion were eager to book meetings and retreats at a place that aligned with their values. During the ceremony, David was invited to speak about how the experience had affected him personally and professionally. Standing at the podium where Whitmore had once held his disastrous press conference, David delivered a message of hope and reconciliation. 6 months ago, Rebecca and I came here expecting to celebrate our anniversary and ended up experiencing the worst kind of discrimination. He began. It was painful and humiliating, and for a while we wondered if speaking out would make any difference. He paused, looking out at the diverse crowd that filled the lobby. But look at what has happened. This hotel has become a beacon of hope and inclusion. The staff represents the beautiful diversity of our community. And most importantly, every guest who walks through these doors now will be treated with the respect and dignity that every human being deserves. Rebecca also spoke, focusing on the importance of using painful experiences to create positive change. As a doctor, she was used to helping people heal from trauma, and she saw their situation as an opportunity to help their community heal from the wounds of discrimination. We could have let this experience make us bitter and angry, she said. Instead, we chose to channel our pain into action. We worked with the civil rights community, we supported the investigation, and we testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger anti-discrimination laws. The impact of their case had indeed reached the state legislature, where new laws had been passed strengthening penalties for businesses that discriminated against customers and creating better reporting mechanisms for victims of discrimination. As the ceremony concluded, David and Rebecca were given a tour of the renovated hotel. Their original anniversary suite had been preserved exactly as it was, but with a plaque outside the door explaining its significance in the hotel's history. "Would you like to stay in the suite tonight?" Angela asked. "We'd be honored to have you as our guests." David and Rebecca looked at each other and smiled. "Actually, we'd love that," Rebecca replied. "It would help us create some better memories of this place." That evening, as they sat in the same suite they had been denied 6 months earlier, David and Rebecca reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them back to this moment. The view from their window showed the same city skyline, but everything felt different now. "Do you ever regret speaking out?" David asked his wife. "Never," Rebecca replied without hesitation. "What happened to us was wrong, but look at what it led to. This hotel employs dozens of people who might not have had these opportunities before. Hundreds of guests will be treated fairly because of the changes that were made. And who knows how many other businesses will think twice before discriminating against their customers." As they prepared for bed in their beautifully appointed suite, David and Rebecca knew that their anniversary weekend had finally gotten the ending it deserved. Not the quiet, relaxing getaway they had originally planned, but something much more meaningful. The satisfaction of knowing that their painful experience had helped create a more just and equal world for everyone who came after them. Outside their window, a small sign in the hotel garden read, "All are welcome here, a promise of dignity and equality for every guest." It was a promise that would be kept, ensuring that no other couple would ever experience what David and Rebecca had endured in this place.